So it gives me great pleasure then, without further ado, to introduce you to Nancy Hay. Nancy's the Executive Director at Works Wellbeing, and she's going to outline the main drivers of wellbeing and discuss what that looks like in a teaching context and talk about some of the practical actions that we can all take. Nancy, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just sharing my screen here. It's brilliant to have so many of you here, and also to be able to support this programme of work. It's really important that we do, particularly in this current context. So I am Nancy Hay. I'm the Executive Director of the What Works Centre for Wellbeing. We are my tech working. We are the UK's national body for wellbeing evidence, policy and practice. So we are a collaborative organisation, and we're set up to develop and share robust, accessible and useful evidence about wellbeing, and particularly what organisations can do to improve it. We work with a large number of universities across the UK and beyond to bring together the global evidence base, and then we work with all sectors across government, across charities, across business and research to apply it in context. So I will start today's session bringing sort of the national context, some of the principles behind wellbeing, and then we'll start to apply it at an individual level, at a group or team level, and then at an organisation level, and to hopefully give you at least one or two things that, regardless of your role, you can take away and apply in your day-to-day work from the start. So please do feel free to put any comments in the chat, introduce yourself if that's useful. I'll try and respond in real time as we go, as well as the time at the end to pick up any comments and specific questions you have. So I will, given that we advise the whole of the UK, I will try and pick out the bits that apply most specifically for your sector, but I'm not an expert specifically in teaching, although I have worked with a number of your colleagues around the country on this area. So firstly, I'm going to say, how are you doing? That is what wellbeing is. How are you doing? And you kind of have to ask, and it turns out we do ask how we're doing. This is what has happened across the UK are on the top measures of wellbeing that we look at. We look at many, but this is the top ones, and you can see that overall wellbeing or life satisfaction has had a wobble over between March and August. Our sense of things that are purposeful and that are worthwhile also likewise had a wobble, but actually peaked in June. So this is that we're all working together to a shared aim. Happiness, which is our positive mood, a technical term is affect, but there's a whole range of positive moods, but happiness is the one that we use to best describe it, had a massive dip in March and has recovered a bit. And anxiety, which is a bucket of wings for negative affect, which is negative moods, particularly worry in this case, was massively high. So you can see the interrelationship. And so this is what we use, both the UK data and internationally, to help inform what actually does make a difference to people's wellbeing. So this is the kind of the trends that we can see in the UK. But you can see this more detail from the sort of a more broader sort of analysis of different people's moods. And this is the most exciting this data's ever got. But you can see that normally this purple line, we're really, really happy. And look, it jumped down off the cliff in March. And this orange line here, which was feeling scared, went through the roof. And it's still fairly all over the place. We were very scared. We were really quite unhappy, which is unusual for the UK. We were very, very bored, which is this dark green line, which is dropping, unfortunately. Stress had a little bump, but we're just as stressed as normal now. And frustration got quite high and is even higher. And this, again, you can see the sort of balance of positive to negative mood in the thing. But the main bit here is that we're humans. We don't like uncertainty. I think teachers particularly love to plan and are brilliant at framing and giving certainty. And I think when they can't do that, it can be quite quite overwhelming, and change itself takes quite a lot of emotional brain space, but also physical time and space. So there's a change cost to that, and it's emotionally draining. So a couple of points I'd take about this is that we are human beings, but we're also human doings, and when there's uncertainty, we like to do and have control, and we had some really strong emotions, and there's even more strong emotions when we don't have control and we don't know what to do, and that fear and feeling out of control. The other bit is not being able to plan for the future. There's a mood boosting bit from that, but also we lose feelings of efficacy and achievement and optimism and hope and all these things that are great for our well-being that you create on a daily basis, and that can give apathy and frustration, which we've seen. The other thing to say is that it's really normal to have good days and bad days generally, but in change that's even more so, and to have ups and downs. And that information, that emotional information is exactly that. It's emotions, they're information, sorry. And the best way to process them, as is the best way to learn, is this role of reflection, and understanding that this information is there, that I'm feeling, I don't know, happy today or sad today or whatever it is, or overwhelmed today or isolated or underappreciated, whatever it is that you're feeling today, and to work through those emotions and to ground them a little bit. Human beings are also incredibly hopeful, adaptable and resilient. We get used to most things, and you did notice that our well-being sort of bounced back quite a lot. But this is a really uncertain situation, and evidence tends to look backwards. And so in a new situation, I would suggest going back to well-being first principles. So that's what I'm going to do today. But feel free to post in the chat if this resonates or not, actually, with your experience in your area. It's really helpful to understand that. The other thing to say is that, and you will notice that in your day-to-day lives and work, particularly, that just because one person's experience is quite positive, other people's experiences might be negative. So some people might really thrive, or some students might really thrive on actually spending slightly less time with lots of other people, and that is good, whereas other people might find it more difficult. And so what we can see is that our well-being is, and this is just anxiety went up, low happiness doubled, but actually you can see that anxiety was a bigger concern for those who had concerns about their ability to save, or saw a reduction in household finances, or were renting or self-employed. So you can see that the other things affect our well-being other than just our mental health. So what we can see is that this crisis has affected multiple determinants of how we're doing. So we can have a sense of, with well-being, it's always, yes, it is that thing, but it's something else. So there's always multiple things that affect it. And what we can see is that the drivers of well-being are personal, so our social connection, have we got someone to rely on, our partner relationships, our physical health, our mental health. I've put having a child as no or mixed evidence. If you've got children under 5 or teenagers, then your well-being is more likely to be affected as a parent. But on average, though, having a child does not seem to have an overall effect. Basic needs, which we've seen, and then these other things that affect us, and how much we trust people, and I'll come back to that in terms of teamwork later on. And then these other things that are positive with wellbeing, but less positive, as in like they help, but they're not the overriding thing. So music, physical activity, access to engagement with nature and green space help, but obviously they're not the only thing. There's lots of places with lovely green space that doesn't help you with your financial concerns. And then the big one is employment, the quality of our work, which is why we're looking at wellbeing at work in this session. Our commutes, which will be impacted in different ways. I put years of education in the middle. Those who graduate in education tend to do quite well, although it is a reasonably stressful environment. But you can see those different things. But what's happening with the coronavirus crisis is that we're seeing all of those things being affected, and for different people in different ways. And that's what we're looking at here. So I'm just going to pause a sec and think about how you've been at your best at work and what that was like. What contributed to you performing at your best? What was going on in your life, in your work? And feel free to drop a message in the chat if that is something that you feel happy to do. I'm trying to open the chat, I can't see it. Can't immediately see it. So if there's something in there, feel free to jump in. So I'm guessing that these are the sorts of things that you will have said. And I think work can help us a lot with our well-being, and a good job in particular. We spend a lot of our time at work, and 25% of people are saying that work has been helping them cope with the crisis. And the sorts of things that we see that help, and I suspect you probably mentioned, are things like having more control over your job. And I think that can be really tricky. Clarity of what is expected of you, variety in what you do, positive relationships with managers and colleagues and customers, and that will be in different things in different contexts. Belief that your workplace is fair, having a sense of purpose and value, opportunities to use and develop skills and to grow and to learn, a safe and pleasant working environment. And that's changed quite considerably in this current context. Are we safe? Supportive supervision, sense of security and prospects, and a good work-life balance. So I expected you probably picked up a number of those in your experiences of when you've performed well. So the question here is, which of those makes a bigger impact on your well-being at work? And unfortunately, I can't see the chat, so I can't see. Oh, here we are. Brilliant. I can see in the chat. Oh, no one's there. If you wanted to have a guess on what makes the biggest impact on your well-being at work, please have a go. By far, the biggest impact is having an interesting job and good interpersonal relationships. So you can see these at this top end here. And yes, pay matters, and particularly objective, good level, reasonable levels of pay, and relative pay also matters, but objective pay as well. But you can also see down here sort of stress, danger and difficulty, particularly stress, and this work-life balance, which will vary for different people. And then you can see these other aspects that do affect our well-being at work. But you can see by far this interesting job and interpersonal relationships really makes a difference at work. So we'll focus a little bit more on those. So we took all those drivers and applied them in the workplace. And one of the things I really want to stress here is that you see lots of recommendations about what will improve well-being at work, no emails after hours, or different things, or everyone stopping at different times. The really key bit is here is that not all work is the same. You could be, if you're delivering post, it's quite a different, walking around on foot, it's quite a different to if you're on IT help desk, or a vet, or different types of work are the same. So what will be appropriate in your context will vary. And I think that's quite important when the geography of where you work changes, and the population that you're working with changes, and the demographic of your staff changes. So understanding what makes the biggest difference where you are is really important. Having said that, the things that make the biggest difference is that people work for people wherever you are. So your relationships and your physical and mental health are really the top drivers of this on well-being, regardless of where you are, and in the workplace context, that is still true. The second is we need to feel safe, and we've called that security and environment. So that's our work conditions, our safety, physical safety, but also our emotional safety, sort of bullying and harassment, and our financial security. So our ability to withstand financial shocks and things like that. And you saw the link with anxiety and financial conditions. And then the environment as well. So that will be your physical environment, which will have changed. And then your culture, the identity and values of your organization, and the fairness that you work in. And then lastly, also important is this purpose bit. We need to feel fulfilled, and a large number of things about accomplishment and things like that. But I would stress that the relationships one is really quite important. So those are the drivers, and that question is, how do they apply in your context now? I've had a little go at what that might look like. So some of that will be about mental health services for home workers, any changed routine that you've got, do you sort of and any professional support that might have changed. You may have been able to meet up with people that you can no longer meet up with, or maybe have greater access to it. This uncertainty, this physical security, environment will have changed. The teams and ways of working will have changed. Maybe your normal networks don't exist, or your teams are changing rapidly as people isolate or come back or whatever. And then this purpose bit, making sure communication is there is really important. But there may be other bits about why it matters to do your job that we'll pick up later. Might be worth sort of thinking about sort of what is it that's motivating? Why do you teach? And then there'll be other things in that some employees will have to be laid off, and then fairness is important there. And different people will have different experiences. So some specific things I wanted to draw out because I think they're really important in this current context. And there's some things that might get better and some things that might get worse. And so some things that might improve are commute. This may or may not affect you, but the changes to our commute can be quite big. So there's lots of content there, but the big thing is overall, normally our commute sort of balances out. But if we have a physical active travel, we feel happier with our leisure time as well as our commute. Bus commuters tend to feel more strongly that their journey's bad, and that longer duration rail commutes are actually less strained. But the day-to-day stresses of that commute that may have got better or may have got worse depending on your experience. A big bit here is about workplace belonging. So one of the things that we can see in resilient organisations is whether employees share the values of the organisation where they work. Are they loyal and proud of their organisation? We call this sort of an organisational sense of identity, but this is about values of the organisation and the purpose, and about how that can really help withstand. It provides resilience to organisations and countries actually at difficult times. You're better able to problem solve and work together. The other one is that this is about good work, wellbeing and changes in performance outcomes, but the key bit here is your normal good management practices help. So that day-to-day good management stuff that you do, or the management training that you've been meaning to go on, are really important. So you can see this in the NHS, but don't put off that staff conversation that you've been meaning to have, or do look back on what you've achieved over that time. But the other bit is to say that, and this was just talking about this in relation to how teachers do compared to other professions. I would say that the line management relationship is the biggest, most important thing in the workplace. But our managers are really squeezed too. And if you can look at here, these middle managers in particular seem to have quite poor mental and physical health. This is a CIPD survey, so this is all professions. But this, the role of managers is really quite important. And so whilst they're really important for your well-being as a staff member, actually the manager's mental health and well-being is really important too. And what we actually see is the midlife crisis is real. I don't think I've got the slide here, but the midlife crisis is real. So we have peak happiness at 23 and 68, and it's lowest at 48. And that may reflect how your group is doing, your professional group is doing as well. So I'm just going to pause a sec, and we're staring at a screen. I just want to make sure we've stretched a little bit. So if you could take 2 seconds, well, a minute actually, we're going to just move around. So one of the things we found as a risk is I don't have a walk between meetings, for example, or we're sat in the same place for a long time. And this may not be true for you, but what we're trying to do is stretch our legs, our wrists, our backs, our upper limbs, our shoulders. So after 25, our back stops being so flexible. So twisting and moving side to side. So turning side to side, we stretch forwards and backwards and reach over our heads as well. So just making sure you've done your stretching as well. Great stuff. Great to see you all doing that. So particularly if you get your arms over your heads, that will lift your mood. Excellent stuff. twisting your arms, getting that keyboard out, doing your shoulders, getting a bit of physical movement into your body will lift your mood, but also help keep your body physically moving and give you a little bit more energy as well. So we've done that. We've looked after our body. I'll talk a little bit about the things that you can practically do. So on a personal level, at a team level, and the sort of organizational bigger impact level as well. So this is from the evidence into practice. So it's important to remember the different types of things that can help. So if you're having a crisis, telling somebody that they should go and do a knitting group or a reading group is not necessarily helpful. But then on the other hand, those things are good. So knowing whether you're stepping in because somebody is in crisis, so it's just the red bit, or are they struggling and we just need to, or they might be at risk of struggling, or are they coping well, we just need to support that, or are we actively pushing it? So this is a public health approach to wellbeing, and this is quite helpful to understand what type of thing you might choose to do and what support might need or where to reach people. So that's just the background to where I'm thinking. So we know lots of things help with our wellbeing. Lots of things. Actually, I can be really confident. I've got these 3 locks on the left of the screen, which is our highest confidence rating that wellbeing training is effective and a wide range of approaches work. And on the right-hand side, you can sort of see the types of things that can help. So sleep, relaxation, happiness, acceptance and commitments therapy, problem solving, emotional health, mindfulness, all these sorts of things seem to help lots of different types of professions. There isn't, I mean, you'll notice a lot of these are in the healthcare sector, but there's no reason to think they don't translate across to other sectors. And there is, I think, a growing amount of evidence of what specifically might help in the education sector that the Department for Education, I think, have pulled together. So from that, I can tell you these things. So firstly, I would pick one of these science-backed summaries. These are not necessarily the most important things, because we saw earlier that money and things like that matter as well. But these are practical summaries that you can use as a rule of thumb to remember how to bring out in your wellbeing. So I'm going to just highlight 3 different ones here. So one is the 5 ways to wellbeing. I think many of you will know, and there's a children's 5 ways to wellbeing in the bottom of the screen. So the 5 ways are connect, be active, take notice, which is noticing the good things in life, noticing when you're happy, keep learning, and giving. And these sort of are 5 practical actions you can do on a daily or weekly basis that sort of help top up your levels of well-being and protect what you're doing. And you can see for children, young people, they've switched out giving for being creative and playing. And this gives you agency, control, all the things that come, you'll know from your personal, professional perspective about the importance of these creation things. There's no reason why that's just for children and young people. It's just that you needed 5 for the public health message. The other 2 I find really helpful. Some of you will be familiar with Action for Happiness. They've got a great dream mnemonic. I can just never quite remember them all, but they are really helpful, and they do a monthly calendar you can subscribe to. We've evaluated their program, and it does improve well-being if you're interested in that one. And then another one that I like, that I find really helpful, because it has sort of the physical health in there as well, that also improves mental health, is this PERMA plus model, which is positive emotion. And there's lots of different types of positive emotion out there. It's not all leaping for joy. It could quite simply be shared reading, quiet, positive contentment. It could be, or it could be super excitement. You know, there's lots of positive emotions out there, but topping up your positive emotion, music, all sorts of things like that help there. Physical activity, engagement or flow, getting absorbed in a task. You may notice that if you're you get pulled around in lots of different ways. Sometimes you just need to focus and really engage in a deep task. I sometimes have to set time aside to do that, and that can be tricky. Relationships, absolutely key, and I'll come back to that in a second. Meaning, finding some purpose in what you do, and accomplishment. So getting things done, feeling like you've achieved stuff is kind of important. If it's all about achievement, then you won't sustain it. But that getting stuff done, ticking things off a list, really positive. And then the physical activity, nutrition, eat your 5 a day, up to 10 a day of fruit and veg. Really helps. There's no limit on that, how much that helps. Sleep, really 7 or 8 hours for most people really helps. And if you lose too much sleep, it's a bit like you're drunk, which is why there are driving limits for lorry drivers. For example, you can catch up your sleep, obviously. Your deficit doesn't have to have as much, but sleep is important. And optimism, which is sort of the hope for the future. So those are, pick one of those, have a rule of thumb. I was going to pick some practical things that might be particularly useful to some of the concerns that I know that colleagues may be interested in. So people have talked about overwhelm, feeling underappreciated or isolated. So I'm going to pick up some of these. These are from the Bulletproof Mind program, which is a US Navy SEALs one. But I really like it because they're really practical, not least because it's got an elephant in it. So technique 1 is eat the elephant. So breaking down any daunting task into intermediate bite-sized objectives. If you can, particularly if it's in a 24-hour window, but just focusing on the next step. And I think actually that's something that you guys are really professionally very good at. But this is often the thing to do, just break it down into step-by-step pieces and just do the next step. Visualizing success, again, writing down positively framed imagination of succeeding. So this is the goal setting in a positive context, and which is really is important actually. But I would probably go, you need, yes, that's important, but you also need the eat the elephant step together. Emotional control. So this is one of the ones that I find really practically useful. So in any stressful situation, I can do this fairly discreetly, and it physically impacts the body. So I might ask you to join in with me on this one. But a breathing exercise is simply breathing in for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then breathing out for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do that a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4. And that physically helps your body get its stress hormones under control. It can be done fairly discreetly. I just pat my fingers on the side of my leg. If you feel like you need to be a bit more energized, breathe in for slightly more, maybe 5, 6, get yourself a bit more energy going. If you need to calm down a bit, so a bit overwhelmed, breathing out for slightly longer helps calm the body physically. But even just doing breathing in and breathing out, you can do that in all sorts of different contexts fairly discreetly, and it helps get the emotions back under control. And it's just, again, that emotion is just information, but it's triggering you to respond quickly. Reframing. This is how interpreting the bad event as a more positive thing. So drawing out the positive experiences in an event. The one I'm a big fan of, again, is this small successes. Celebrating small successes, every little bit helps. And sometimes just getting through the day is a small success, or even the fact that one thing has changed that you were trying to, one of those small steps in the eating of the elephant. But it really helps, and particularly when you're feeling like you're going 2 steps forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps back half the time. Small victories really help. And camaraderie, and this is I said I'd come back to relationships, and this is really important. So thinking about what brings meaning to your life, what you care about, people who share similar vision and values to you, and caring for those people and them caring for you is something that really can help just connect you to something bigger, and a whole load of different bits. But that camaraderie really is the thing that makes people smile. And then some more specific ones that you might be finding a bit more challenging. This is Every Mind Matters, which is an online learning platform from the NHS. It's not online learning, sorry. It's an online support service from the NHS that millions of people in the country have already used. It has COVID-specific work activity content, but also more generally a mind plan you can do. Some of the things I've picked out of here that might help. we've been working a lot with people who've shifting their routine quite a lot, but getting that daily routine if you're working at home. So if you're asked to isolate, getting a routine as quickly as you can. Building physical and emotional reserves. So get that exercise, get that sleep, get that good nutrition, make sure you've had enough water, not too much salt. Maintaining your boundaries, living in a household. I find it quite difficult to turn off my laptop in the night, for example, but it's quite important. But also, I think there's like 30%, 25%, 30% people having spending too much time with other people. So making sure you've got physical time and space away from each other. And practicing that compassion and kindness that you would to other people, to yourself, and helping, reaching out, knowing where to reach out as well is quite useful, or having that, just knowing where things exist. So I hope there is something in there that you have learnt that you can make use of, that you might pick up. Feel free to share in the chat if there was something that really you found useful yourself, or you think you'd like to find more about. It's always useful to know if somebody else is doing that too. And then I talked about relationships being really good for well-being, and this teamwork bit is really important. And performance is as good as how the team is doing. So what makes a high well-being team? Feel free, if I don't know if anybody is using the chat, I don't think they are, but if you wanted to share in the chat some of the things that you have experienced make a high well-being team, that would be great. I'm going to pick up basically a crash course in teamwork and the things that really help. So the first bit for any, because I'm guessing that your teams will be changing and people will be dropping in and out, but the beginning of a team, which you'll know, is making sure people are accepted and included. What's expected of me, where do I fit in, and how do I fit into the team? Will I be liked? Do people like me? Am I good enough at what I do? Those are the sorts of things that we're thinking of at the beginning of joining any new group or team. So that acceptance and inclusion bit is quite important. But after that, you get a bit bolshy. It becomes a bit I, which again, you'll know. But when people are saying recognize me, it's because they want to feel like they've got something to offer and to feel valued, and to they want to know they want other people to know their role. And this is usually a sign, if somebody is being disrupted, that they want their contribution recognized. I had a colleague once who put his program management certificates up on his desk. I was like, why have you done that? And it turned out that he was very firmly not feeling like he had something to offer and contribution. It was kind of a real statement of that. And then lastly, we should be trying to get towards this sort of openness, trust and support, and this sort of appreciative inquiry type approach of what went well, even better if. And so focusing on, again, those small, this is quite a good approach because it's about celebrating those small successes and working on even better. What's the shortcut for all of that? And there's a hint in the earlier research that I shared, so that at the heart of high wellbeing teams is the purpose of the team. What are the goals within our control that we're focusing on? Who is good at which bits? What are our complementary skill sets? And how do we want to work together? And so those questions help us deal with those ups and downs of people feeling like they're not good enough, feeling that they are better than somebody else or really experienced, and it helps us get through those bumpy rides of it, which is, what is the purpose of the team? What is our specific goals that are within our control is the other bit, and how can we use our skills to underpin the situation? And just on that, social connection at work. So I have just picked up this double lock one here, which means that we can be reasonably confident that shared activities can improve well-being and performance, and that social atmosphere at work matters. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a frivolous activity, as in doesn't have to be the trip to the pub or the quiz night or whatever it is. It could genuinely be just team working across different bits of the team, because it builds social relationship, and if in doubt, build that relationship. The fairness one is probably a slightly aside. I don't think, I'll leave that bit. Also on the team, and I hope this will be useful for some of the concerns about who the experiences of people that you're working with as teachers. So there's 3 bits I wanted to pull out here. One is you are not the target. So on the right here, I've got this emotional hot potato of how moods spread. Often the emotion that's blared at you, whether it's in behavioral terms or literally shouted at you, is often nothing to do with you personally. It's the experience. And I don't know if I've got 2 children, and one of them will get told off, and then that one that's been told off will hit the other one. And so remembering that, I mean, of course, the youngest doesn't then know that, they just retaliate. But knowing that you're not the target is quite helpful, and sort of just getting some objective balance between that. And I think that's true in teams, as well as in other contexts. The other one is noticing your signs. So at the top left, I've got this sort of important decisions on an empty stomach. This was a study with judges, but how they get harsher towards noon when they're hungry or they need a pee. But noticing your battery level. So you can see in the middle, I've got this kind of battery levels. Notice your signs of stress, and notice what helps you recover from that. So one of the ones I get is when I forget names and forget the words for things. And it's got a technical term like nominal aphasia, but I find it harder to find the words for things when I'm stressed. And it's taken me a long time to realize that that is a signal that I just need to stop and unplug for a bit. And I usually sit and do 10 minutes meditation and try and get back in the space that I need to be in. But also just noticing that the impact of physical needs has on our moods. So whether being hungry or tired or needing the loo or hot or cold in this new ventilated room, whether how that can help you understand what is affecting your moods and whether you need to top up. And then that last one is about getting my balance right. So I've talked about sort of positive moods and negative moods. And one of the important things here is about the fact that we are trained to note, our sort of body is more sensitive to negative moods than positive. So you kind of need more of that positive emotion than to sort of make it up. And if your balance of sort of is less than sort of 3-to-1 ratio of positive to negative moods, then you'll sort of go into a spiral that it's harder to get out of. So that boosting your positive mood may seem frivolous, but it really helps because, and you need slightly more of it, particularly if you're dealing with difficult situations or stressful situations. It's all part of life. It's really important part of your jobs. That's why you're good at what you do. But making sure that you've noticed your sign and topped up that positive experience. And I think that is probably true of people who are in more stressful circumstances, working with a population group who may be experiencing more difficult life events. And you being a trusted adult is really fundamentally important. So that's the team bit. If you had any questions, feel free to add them in the chat and think about. But I'll just end on this last bit, and people can chip in. So what I want to say is that the big important thing is that the thing that we can give you your own personal resources. You can see that double lock on that first item. You can have that training to manage your well-being. We can change the ways of working to improve your well-being, but the thing that makes the biggest difference overall is whether it fits into this broader context of profession and organizational work. So knowing where this organizational work approach, and I don't know if this is probably less relevant to you, but understanding this broad factors that can impact on your well-being. These are some questions that I used across businesses just to pick up on all these drivers of well-being in the workplace as they apply to you. And I think that the Ed Support has a good summary of what that will look like, but you can start to understand which bits of well-being you're acting on with different types of policies, whether it's financial support, whether it's peer support, whether it's about your physical or mental health. Knowing which bits, are you sort of coming in when you're in a debt trouble, or are you sort of just managing to put something aside on a daily basis for your financial well-being, or is it something that's happened in other areas? So there's ways of understanding your well-being, but that I think is probably more for your leadership one. So the last thing I'm going to remember is, like, we were talking about when you were at your best at work, and tapping into that and thinking about how we can make that ripple through and why this matters. So the impact you have, there's lots of data here, but the key point here is to say the impact of the school on the well-being of children and young people at 11, at 8, 11 at secondary, and age 34 is enormous. So, and you can see that in the data. So these numbers here in bold are bold because they're big. This is from the Origins of Happiness research from Professor Lord Richard Layard at the Centre for Economic Performance at the London School of Economics, funded by the Centre. And you can see the impact of a teacher at age 8, at age 11, and later at age 34. And your impact on the emotional health of children is greater than the impact of performance in maths. And so the impact of what you do really matters. So I'm going to go back to this last point of who inspired you when you were at school. How specifically did they do that inspiring? What was it? Can you think back? And thinking about what 3 sort of differences you've made to other people in the last week. And that difference could just be making someone smile who looks like they're having a bad day. So finding your purpose in it is really helpful in getting your perspective and the difference that you made to other people. And lastly, I want to end on this, is that there's a real ripple effect. So we can see that people take their job home. People are part of a community. They lead scout groups. They are part of a church. They are they help out with the football team, things like that. They're part of a community. They go and help shop, and those communities make up our society. And so the impact that we could have through good workforce wellbeing is really, really important. And I think I'll end on that note, and we can have some time for questions.
Thanks a million, Nancy. That's fantastic. As in the workplace, it has happened on more than one occasion that I have overheard a new colleague being inducted to our organisation and advised not to schedule a meeting with me at 12 o'clock because I'd be hungry. And that was definitely considered not a good way to introduce any topic. So yeah, it's always good to come back and remember some of those important things. Colleagues who are in the room, if you have questions and particular things you want to follow up, please do use the chat to ask them. One of the things that I was quite keen to ask you about, Nancy, was something that came up in an earlier session and is something that we get asked a lot at Education Support. We can demonstrate great evidence for why leaders ought to pay attention to well-being. And we can make the case in a very warm and human way, or we can make it with quite ugly and blunt numbers that demonstrate either in economic terms or performance terms why it matters. But it's that thing of leading a horse to water and not being able to make them drink. We cannot force leaders to take it seriously. And I suppose coming at it from your experience, because you look at large populations, at national level and whatever else, from your learning, is there anything else that we can do with individual leaders who, in a workplace context, kind of hold the keys to being able to improve what's happening at the level of a school, if we take a school organisation?
I think that's a really common experience, actually, and why I divided up the section into the sort of the I, we, us as well. So what that came from was a colleague actually in the Ministry of Defence who was like, I can't get senior leaders to engage. What can I do where I am? That's where we came up with this sort of, what can I do in my own immediate sphere? What can I do in my team? And actually, big organisations are just small groups of people. So that's quite helpful. And obviously, if you can link into the wider professional support, that is really useful as well. I put in a slide about managers because it's quite easy to blame managers and leaders for not taking it seriously when actually it's a really difficult job and often they're not in an easy place. And I know, having just seen it around the world, whenever a senior leader stands forward and say, well, I take well-being seriously, they get absolute huge amounts of abuse for, but how can you be taking well-being seriously if you're also doing X? And I think the best thing that businesses can do is provide a job, and as good a job as possible. And staying in business is absolutely fundamentally important. And often there are trade-offs to be made. So, and those trade-offs are really difficult, and life happens, is the short answer. So it will never be perfect, is the other one. But there is a really good business case for well-being being taken seriously and people being taken seriously that I think is increasing across it. And if you wanted more evidence, that's very helpful. But the best thing to do, in my view, is to try and make it happen as practically and easily as possible, which is what I'm trying to help do.
Yeah. And also going back to your graphic and illustration around the emotional hot potato in teams, again, from what you see on that wider canvas, do you think there's anything we can extrapolate or think about in terms of relationships, again in school context, but between teachers and education staff and students and pupils? Because they're not a team, so in terms of their interactions, it's not happening at that level, but they are all people in a shared space. What do you think about that?
Part of the reason I included it, actually, because I think you were talking about how the challenges actually in managing a context where people may be having very difficult experiences at home, and what I mean. So just to step back a bit. So I obviously that's in teams that happens, but that happens in any environment with other people. So where you get a slightly weird, unexpected reaction and behavior or whatever is different. So that's why partly I included that as a way of managing the some of the behavior or expressions of you will see from people in the classroom. One of the things I've seen from other contexts where children and young people are finding life really difficult is those that are working with them as coaches or other support staff can find it particularly difficult. And the role of supervision in that context is really important. So you get a slightly bigger picture, takes you away from that context and helps you process the experience yourself out of the immediate relationship. And so I would probably say supervision is the key bit for there, and or reflective practice in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because we can make the case, and there is some evidence. There's not big data, but there is some evidence from the literature around how emotion might work between teachers or classroom-based adults and children and young people. But I think the hot potato graphic just immediately struck a chord with me, because it doesn't take it resonates, and we can easily imagine circumstances within which emotions might go in multiple ways actually in a classroom setting that probably aren't neatly plotted anywhere for any of us to point at. I'm going to just ask if anyone else has a question from the floor, then feel free to just ask it. I know that we've got Catherine there is pointing to some other self-care apps. We indeed, and we heard some more about that from Mike Armiger this morning. I think the two very powerful things, Nancy, that come across from that wider landscape in what you presented this morning that really resonated for me were around relationships and purpose. Two of the things that I think are real strengths in the education sector. And when we come back to the positives that we do have, and I know that there is a lot that's difficult and demanding, but we are very rich in this sector in how we value relationships, how core it is to what we do and how we do it. And of course, that sense of purpose. obviously there's a massive number of educators who've joined the profession to make millions of pounds and to wield great power. I mean, we see them everywhere, you know, but there's a few who seem to do it driven out of a genuine purpose to work with children and young people and make a difference. And so that last slide you show is so powerful, because, and I think it's very easy for us to get disconnected from that. And actually, the more often we can come back to it, I think the stronger we can be in what we do in the education sector. So Nancy, thank you so much for coming and sharing your insight and expertise. And thank you to colleagues both in the session here today, but also who are watching this at a later point. And if you do have questions, even if you're watching this on a delayed timescale, email us and we will do our best to address those questions. For anyone who wasn't in this morning's sessions, Jennifer Hart has posted a link to a survey at the bottom of the chat. She promises it's 2 minutes or less to fill it out. If you can take the time to do that, it's really valuable and gives you the opportunity to ask us to focus on things that you're particularly interested in the work that we do over the coming 6 or 7 months. Thank you all very much for your time. Thanks again, Nancy. And for those of you who are returning for the last session of today, Jen is going to tell us the time that session starts. And it's not that I've forgotten it, because I mean, I had a sandwich. I wouldn't lose the information like that. It's just I want to give it a chance to say it.
Thank you very much, Sinead. So the final session of today will be taking place at 2:30. The speaker for that session will be Gabrielle Rolls. She is based at a sort of resilience centre with the fantastic name of Boing Boing, and that's based at the University of Brighton. And Gabrielle is going to be bringing her perspective on staff wellbeing and also talking through some practical tips that hopefully will add to what you've been hearing throughout today. So please, if you're available, do join us. And yeah, thank you very much for being in this session.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Take care.